So the next thing we'll talk about is setting up a voting session. And there's two elements to that. There's the video display element, how we're going to show that voting. Most of the time we want to show the voting. And then there's setting up the voting session in IMU. Right now we'll go ahead and set up the video portion of that. Come over here to the VMU, and I'll go back into design mode. And I'll add a panel, and you can add a panel a couple of ways. You can right click and you can say panel, add a panel, and it'll place one there. Or we can come over here into the designer window, which you right click and say designer, and this window pops up here, and you can click the plus button up there to add a panel. But in this case, I added a panel. We can place this panel anywhere on the screen. Let's say I'll put it right here. Stretch it out like that. And now remember, you click on these buttons to tell what the panel is going to be. Well, this panel is going to be a voting panel. When you add a voting panel to a layout like this, it gives you some kind of blank captions and gives you some idea of what the voting panel is going to look like. Normally has these bar graphs and some prompt text and some text for category 1, 2, 3, and 4. And over here in the designer window for the options, you can adjust how wide those bar graphs are. If you've got quite a lot of text to display here, New York Yankees, maybe that text kind of can take up a lot of space, and so we'll want to make those just give it less screen real estate to the actual bar graph itself. So that's about it for VMU. We add the voting panel, place it on the screen where we want to, and at that point we can go back into play mode. The voting panel is invisible by default because one of the properties of a voting panel is hide when inactive. Let's say most of the time we want to hide it when you're not doing a voting session. So we'll go into play mode. The voting panel is there, but it's hidden. So then we'll come over here into IMU, and we'll set up that voting session over here. All right, so we've set up the voting panel in VMU, and now we're going to set up the voting session in IMU and activate the voting session. Remember, IMU has a number of buttons here on the left-hand side. One of those buttons says Tasks. We'll click on the Tasks button, and the tasks that we can add are here. I'm using the basic version of Interactive Messaging Unlimited. There are 3 versions, Intro, Basic, and Pro. Intro is a simple text-to-screen type application. You can't do very much with it at all, except for simple chatting applications. And there's far fewer options in here. So it's a simpler program for people who only need to do a little bit, just text to screen, and who might be overwhelmed by a lot of options that are in the basic or pro version. The intro version is very good. This is the basic version, so you notice that most of the buttons up here are actually grayed out. They're disabled. In the professional version, we actually have a lot more options in here. But the option we do have available to us, and the one we came here for, is this voting. To add a new voting session, we click on this voting button. That'll bring up this dialog box here that says add a voting task. In the very latest version of the software we have, this doesn't come up. Instead, it goes right to this dialog box here. But in this version, version 4 build 1069, we have to do one more step. So that is, we click the voting button, and then we say New. Now this is where we're going to set up the voting session. The very top part of this is what's called the voting prompt text. This is shown in the top of the voting panel in VMU. Normally this says, this is the thing that compels the people to send a text message, such as, what is your favorite beer? ? Or, here's one that we've done a couple times in the past. Who will win the World Series? ? So that's the voting prompt text. That's going to show up on the video screen. Tell people what it is that they're voting for. This next thing is the progress caption. Total votes so far, that's a pretty good progress text. And most of the time you don't really show the progress anyway, but I'll talk about that in a second. And then down here are your actual voting categories. These are the things that people are going to be entering, such as here we've asked who will win the Red Series, or the World Series. I'll click on the top one, say Edit. Enter the name of the first category here. So let's say New York Yankees. And in parentheses, I'll put text Y. Because this is what we want to compel people to do. They want to text Y. But of course, as much as you want people to do something, they always find a way of messing things up. So that's why we've got this section on keywords. That is that, yes, we're going to look for a Y, which is what we told them to do, but we'll also look for a couple of other things. We'll look for Yankees. We'll look for Yanks. Various ways and mutations of things that if people text not quite what you told them to do, it will still count them as a vote. So I just added a voting category here. And then finally, we've got a box down here that says Vote Accepted Notification. This is a reply that can be sent to the users to let them know that you've counted their vote. Sometimes it's a handy thing. So we could say, thank you for voting for the Yankees. All right. Well, of course, if we're going to have New York Yankees, we've got to have Boston Red Sox. So we enter, so this is the name of this category. This is going to be shown, Boston Red Sox. And in parentheses, we'll put R. Once again, down here, in the keywords, I could put R, Red Sox, all one word, just Sox, and so forth. And thank you for voting for the Red Sox. And then our last category here, give me a baseball team, John.
The Marlins.
Marlins. That's another good one. So, we'll say, and they're Miami, is it? Florida?
Mm-hmm.
Florida.
Florida Marlins.
Florida Marlins. And we'll say text M. And down in here we'll say M Marlins. A couple different misspellings. And thank you for voting for the Marlins. All right, there we go. Another thing, you notice this gauge color. In IMU, or VMU rather, the video portion, each one of those little bar graphs is designated by a color. You can make these colors anything you want. You can make them all the same color. VMU even has the capability of kind of sorting them based on the color and making the top one red hot and kind of getting cooler down from that. But in this case, we'll just use the default values of red, green, and blue. And now there's a couple of other options that you can set up here in VMU or IMU, and you can just leave them blank if you don't want to. One thing is it says double vote blocking notification. Now, let's say you're a real Yankees fan, and so you're going to keep on sending text messages to try to stuff the ballot box. IMU can be configured so that it will only accept one vote, like for example, presidential election, something important like that. You really only want people to cast one vote and one vote only. So what we could say here is, sorry, you can only vote one time for your favorite team. And likewise, there's something else here called change vote blocking notifications. Let's say, I'm voting for the Yankees and I'm kind of on the fence, and I see that the Yankees are starting to lose, and the crowd's really getting me excited about the Red Sox. So I want to change my vote and start voting for the Red Sox. Well, IMU can be configured to ignore people that change their vote too, and send back a text message optionally, such as, sorry, you cannot change your vote, so forth. So you can see here are the options that you have when setting up a voting session. You have the prompt text, which appears at the top of the window, each one of the caption texts, and the keywords. One thing to understand here is that the keywords are what is the text that's actually watched. The category caption is only something that's shown in VMU. The category caption and this color has nothing to do with the actual voting that will, the voting keywords that are being watched in order to increment and count them as a vote. And I've noticed a little mistake here. I'm going to put text R, not just R. But that's it. Pretty much that's all there is to it. At this point I can click OK and then OK. This area over here shows me what that voting session is, because what I could do is I can have any number of voting sessions stacked up here. I can have who's going to win the next presidency, what's your favorite beer, who's going to win the World Series, and I can turn these on and off on VMU at any time I want to. So at this point, you can click on these and kind of learn about them. It tells you about the voting names you've assigned to them, the categories, and even the counts here. The percentage, since we haven't really started this voting session yet, these are sitting at 0. So once you've set up the voting session, there's one more step to actually get it to happen. And that's, you press this button here called Activate. Once we activate the voting session, that's when IMU will start watching for these text messages to come in with an R or a Y or an M to start counting them as votes. Before you activate it, what will happen is any text messages that come in like that will just think, IMU will think that they're bound for the screen, the chat screen, and not really for voting system. So that's why you have to select the voting session and then activate it. So we've set up our voting panel in IMU, or VMU. We've set up our voting session in IMU, and now we're going to activate it. When we press this Activate button, our voting panel in VMU, which was once invisible because it was inactive, all of a sudden becomes visible. But what we notice here is a slight problem. Just as I feared, the text is a little bit too large to fit in there. There's a couple of ways we could solve this problem. Come back into design mode and click on the voting panel and adjust those gauges to move them over a little bit. Probably enough. Let's see. Yeah, that did it. Another way we could do it is actually just rearrange our layout some. Common actually to put the voting panel underneath the message panel. And kind of, we can make it smaller this way, but a lot wider this way. And just kind of rethink our approach here a little bit. So that's another way to do it. So now we have our panels up here, the message panel, which can receive text messages from users like this, text messages from the users. And we have our voting panel down here, which can receive votes. So let's just give that a try. Got our voting session activated here. Kind of keep an eye on it. Keep an eye on the counters. And I will send a SMS message to me with the simple Y. And there we go. It's reading it. And there's my message. There's my vote that has been counted. So far there's only one vote, so I represent 100% of the voters. And in fact, I just got a text message here that says, "Thank you for voting for the Yankees." Now, under my current setup here in IMU, I'm allowing duplicate votes and allowing change of vote. So now what I could do is reply here, and I can text an M. And so now I'm changing my vote. And my vote has just been counted. And I'm getting a text message back here that says, "Thank you for voting for the Marlins." And if we take a look up there on the gauges, we can see that it's a split between 50-50, Yankees and Marlins, because there's been 2 votes only. And you can see here's the percentage counter. In IMU, you control how the voting shows up. Like, for example, if I say show total, over here in the VMU screen, you'll see total votes so far 2. We could say show gauges, show the percentages instead of the total, and so forth. And this is handy because sometimes you really don't want the people to know the results of the vote in real time. So for example, we can do this, where we can say the voting panel is there. Who will win the World Series? Text Y for New York Yankees, text R for Boston Red Sox, and so forth. But we don't show them what the total is, we don't show them the gauge, we don't show them the count so far. And then at the end of the voting session, we'll show the votes and the counts and so forth. So that's one thing you could do. It's all done right here with these little check boxes. Under normal circumstances, you show the gauges and the percentage in real time. And under normal circumstances, for something as lively as a club, mobile DJ, trade show, that sort of thing, you really don't care about duplicate votes or people changing the vote. This isn't really something as critical as a presidential election or anything like that. Incidentally, IMU has been used by a company in Nigeria to do voting for some kind of a beauty pageant. And in that case, absolutely, they locked it down and did not allow duplicate votes or a change of vote. And so actually, what I'll go ahead and do is I'll uncheck those, and I'll send one more text message. I'll just repeat my Y. See what happens here. And you can see that the counters did not change. And yet I can see a text message coming in on my BlackBerry here. It says, "Sorry, you can only vote one time for your favorite team." So we can see how that works. Let's take a look at something else. Right now we're in the tasks section of IMU. If we come back here into the messages, if I come over here into this voting folder, I could see here that I could see when I voted, the time I voted, and the category that I voted for. Now these were the 2 votes that were counted. If I take a look over here into the blocked folder, we also see that one of these messages from me, a message Y, because I texted a Y, and we can see the reason why this message was blocked was because of a duplicate vote. So when IMU is configured to ignore duplicate votes or changes of votes, what will happen is those votes will not be counted. They will not go into the voting folder. Instead, they will be directed into the blocked folder. One thing to keep an eye on here is in the tasks. Let's say I want to run a different voting session now. Okay, this voting session's over, so I want to terminate this voting session. Click the terminate button. The voting panel in VMU disappears, and now what I can do is I can come over here to this other voting session that I've previously set up and activate this one. This is what's the best beer, Budweiser, Heineken, Miller. So you can see here that I've got one voting panel, and in fact, in the basic version of IMU, there is a limitation that I can only have one voting session going on at a single point in time. That's why this voting session actually became deactivated here. So I can only activate one voting session at a time, and after I've activated them, I should terminate them. Now, one of the things you'll notice is that these voting sessions are there. They've already recorded something valuable, useful. It could be your votes for the favorite to win the presidency, favorite beer, who will win the World Series, and so forth. And you see these counters are still showing, when I click on these actual voting sessions, they still show what those counts were. And that will happen down there. And down here in this task archive, we can see here's a voting task, here's when it started, here's when it ended, here's how many messages were processed during that task. And if I want to, I could even right-click and I could say Show Vote State, and it will resend that out to VMU. So that's another way where you can say, this is the results of the voting session. But in order to restart this, let's say I want to run this again. It's the next night, and I want to run, get another poll to see how many people are going to vote for Budweiser or for the Yankees, what have you. In order to activate this voting session again, I press this Restart button, and then Activate. And now, remember that the results of this were still recorded down here, so we don't have to worry about losing the results of a previous vote. We don't have to worry about creating a brand new voting session that has exactly the same information that we did, the same categories, the same text, same everything. All you have to do is restart the voting session and then activate it, and then you'll be off and running.